Otago in Air Haere. The health minister's dreaming if he doesn't think this is a crisis. Doctors respond to Andrew Little's refusal to say the C word. Claims vaping has reached epidemic proportions and the call for a nationwide crackdown. The rocky road ahead for mortgage holders as the central bank prepares to hike rates again. A mum and dad, both with a terminal diagnosis, are crowdfunding treatment to stay alive as long as they can for their young sons. We know it's winter, but this is some nasty weather. Heavy rain, gales and snow are hammering the south and closing roads. We'll have the latest. And situations vacant, but the interview room's empty. Why is that?
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, ko Anna Thomas Tane. Wild weather is continuing to cause havoc across parts of the country. The storm is lashing Canterbury now, and people who live at Selwyn Huts have been asked to evacuate voluntarily because of the swollen Selwyn River. Steady rain has been falling across the Canterbury Plains, with snow in the high country forcing the closure of a number of roads. The Regional Council says the Selwyn River is expected to peak after dark. Lower Selwyn resident Brian King says he and his wife were staying put for now.
If the water comes right up at around White Cliffs and things like that, you can get a sort of an overflow that comes roaring down the river. Could be up to 6 foot tall by the time it gets all the way down to here. So we'll just keep an eye on that, and that's all we can really do at this stage.
Elsewhere, Auckland Council has received 116 emergency calls after heavy rain. Remataka Hill between Wellington and Wairarapa is now open after being closed by slips this afternoon. In the South Island, there are highways and local roads closed in Canterbury, the West Coast, Otago and Marlborough, including the Crown Range, Lindis, Burks and Porters Passes. Some doctors have given the Health Minister an open invitation to visit them at work as Andrew Little continues to deny there is a crisis in the sector. 900 doctors were surveyed by the New Zealand Women in Medicine Charitable Trust, and it found the vast majority say it is a crisis. Dr Kushner Borthwick is a GP at Green Bay Medical Centre and says the Minister needs to visit general practice to see what they're dealing with. The survey found many health professionals are dealing with widespread understaffing and under-resourcing, and you can hear more on this in Checkpoint shortly. Families on tight budgets could come under even more pressure if the official cash rate rises again tomorrow. The Reserve Bank is widely expected to raise the OCR by 0.5% to 2.5%, making it the third rise in a row. Mortgage advisor Bruce Patton expects to see home loan interest rates rise, putting more pressure on households.
People's general affordability as their mortgage continues to go up, coupled with the cost of living, which is just out of control. You know, every time I get a bill, it seems to be 5, 10, 20, 30% higher than it was 5 months ago. That's really the thing that's biting people.
Bruce Patton says some borrowers are breaking mortgages now to lock in a rate they know they can afford. The Prime Minister says the Pacific Islands Forum must ensure there's no coercion in play from development partners. China's security pact with the Solomon Islands has become a key issue at the forum in Suva. Jacinda Ardern says China is changing the way it engages, while the US is stepping back up after its engagement had waned.
You can see that all of this activity occurring at the same time does mean we have a more contested environment. That's where we've got to come back to the principles. What's important to us as a region? In our minds, specific priorities, to make sure that there's no coercion in play. Let's make sure that we respect the sovereignty of everyone. But again, if it's a security-related matter, we don't want the militarisation of our region.
Jacinda Ardern will meet Solomon Islands Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare tomorrow ahead of the wider Leaders Forum on Thursday. The chair of the Christchurch Stadium Delivery Board says he's confident ratepayers won't be asked to contribute more to the project after multiple budget increases. Barry Bragg announced today a fixed price of $683 million for the multi-use arena has been agreed with the lead contractor. He says a significant portion of funding has been set aside as contingency, but won't reveal how much.
We don't want to use the contingency. But we've had expert advice to say and the council have required this, what is the total project budget so that we can make allowance for that and we don't have to ask ratepayers for any further money.
Christchurch City Councillors will decide on Thursday whether the stadium will be built with an increased budget. To sport, and despite slumping to an all-time low of 4th in the world rankings, All Blacks captain Sam Cane says they can't allow it to distract them ahead of the series decider against Ireland in Wellington this weekend. Ireland have moved up to 2nd following their first win in New Zealand, with France now number 1 and the Springboks 3rd. Cane says their aim is to regain the number 1 spot, but the priority has to be stopping the Irish from claiming a maiden series win in Aotearoa.
We've got enough on our hands digesting what happened in the weekend and then focusing on the game in the weekend to worry about things like world rankings, and that sort of stuff takes care of itself when we're playing well. So that's where all the energy is on.
Meanwhile, Ireland play the Māori All Blacks in Wellington tonight. Sir Mo Farah has revealed he was trafficked into the UK illegally under the name of another child. The 4-time Olympic champion told the BBC he was born Hussein Abdi Kahin, brought to the UK with a woman and her children under the name of another boy called Mohammed Farah. Farah says he was forced to leave war-torn Somaliland in West Africa.
Despite what I've said in the past, my parents never lived in the UK. When I was 4, my dad was killed in a civil war. As a family, we were torn apart. I was separated from my mother, and I was brought into the UK illegally.
And the former Manchester United forward Nani has joined A-League football club Melbourne Victory on a 2-year contract. That's the news.
When is it a crisis and when isn't it a crisis?
You know, I was asked to declare a crisis in ED in April last year. I was asked to declare a crisis in ICU in the middle of last year. I was asked to declare a crisis when Delta broke out and people had to be stretched between vaccination and responding to Delta. I was asked to declare a crisis when Omicron came about and we had care in the community and people being stretched thinly.
Crisis? What crisis? Not on Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until Wednesday at midnight. Severe weather warnings and watches for wind, rain and snow about central and southern New Zealand ease later today or early tomorrow. So for Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, fine spells and isolated showers. Waikato to Manawatu, including Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Rain with heavy falls turning to showers this afternoon and northeast gales easing. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain with heavy falls clearing this evening. Winds gale at times. Horowhenua to Wellington and Wairarapa, also Marlborough and Nelson. Periods of rain with heavy falls clearing tomorrow morning, except Horowhenua to Porirua. Porirua. East or northeast gales easing today. Bulla and Westland, areas of rain easing this afternoon. Severe gale easterlies in exposed places easing this evening. Canterbury and Otago, heavy rain falling as snow down to 300 metres easing overnight and tomorrow. Strong or gale easterlies tending southerly tomorrow. Southland and Fiordland scattered rain. And for the Chatham Islands, rain and northeast gales developing tonight. They change to strong westerlies and showers tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 5:07. You're listening to Lisa Owen and Checkpoint.
Nā mihi ana, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Tonight, health workers convinced they're facing a crisis despite Andrew Little's refusal to use the C word. He's dreaming, one doctor says. But first, a fierce storm is hitting Christchurch and Banks Peninsula this afternoon, with several roads closed because of flooding. Our reporter Adam Burns joins us now from Christchurch with the latest. Adam, bring us up to speed.
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, from a very wet Christchurch. It's been bucketing down. Well, it's still bucketing down, and it has been for virtually the entire day throughout the region. At the moment, for the listeners who can't see me, we're on the intersection of Barbados Street and Oxford Terrace near the Avon River. There's a kind of extensive surface flooding, and the area has been roped off, one of several road closures around Christchurch that the Christchurch City Council has confirmed throughout the afternoon. As far as the major highways are concerned, I think there's about a dozen. Last check with Wakakotahi. So, I mean, if you've been on the road throughout the South Island, your travel plans are more likely to have been impacted. So. And those road closures have been due to a full smorgasbord of reasons, whether it be snow, fallen trees, flooding, the works pretty much.
Yeah, Adam, it looks like the Avon River's coming up to meet you there. If you can just turn around and look over your shoulder for us, for those people who aren't watching, you've got a couple of cars parked there. I mean, how far up is the water getting for those vehicles?
Yeah, it's maybe about an inch, maybe just over an inch up on those tyres, and this is pretty much the case around numerous parts of Christchurch, particularly some of those low-lying areas, some of those more vulnerable areas in the eastern suburbs as well. We've had numerous reports of surface flooding, so the Christchurch City Council has certainly had their work cut out throughout the day, but it's been the case throughout the wider region as well.
Evacuations,
reports
Adam?
Of flooding.
Are they telling people to get out of their homes? Yeah.
No, not. We've had reports of no evacuations as of yet. The Canterbury Regional Council was recommending communities in the upper and lower Selwyn Huts areas to consider evacuating this afternoon near Lake Ellesmere. Some of those residents I spoke to this afternoon, they're used to the threat of floods. And they were wanting to tough it out. They were a bit reluctant to depart their homes this afternoon, but Civil Defence will be on hand, and at least some of those residents should be kind of monitoring that situation closely throughout to the next few hours.
What's happening with the Heathcote River?
Yeah, we've had reports kind of late this afternoon that the Heathcote, which runs through Christchurch, has breached its banks. Speaking to Civil Defence about an hour ago, they were only just kind of made aware of it. They had confirmed that there were reports of water overflowing from the Heathcote onto the roads, but it hadn't yet threatened neighbouring properties as of yet. But they did recommend to some of those residents, if the water is starting to kind of spill into your property, to get in touch with the Christchurch City Council pretty promptly.
Thanks for the update, Adam. That's Adam Burns there, rather sodden Adam. It is 12 minutes past 5. Do let us know what it's like in your area if you're in Christchurch. You can text us on 2101. Kia amo tunu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Health Minister is dreaming if he thinks it's not a crisis. That from one of 900 doctors who completed a survey by the New Zealand Women in Medicine Charitable Trust that found the overwhelming majority believed the system is in crisis. Last night, in an open letter to the Prime Minister, the Trust warned Aotearoa is at risk of a catastrophic collapse of their healthcare workforce. Still, Minister Andrew Little refuses to use the word crisis, and that's left many feeling ignored as well as undermined and under pressure. 3 doctors who took part in the survey gave Checkpoint their diagnosis of healthcare in this country and a taste of life and death on the front line.
Hi, I'm Kusha Borthwick. I'm a GP in West Auckland. I work full-time. I have 2,100 patients enrolled with me, and a lot of COVID at the moment.
So how's your day been going so far?
It's pretty crazy, yep. So it's a tricky time because, of course, lots of people are getting sick with COVID and other viruses. So at the moment, we've got 2 doctors down. There's normally 6 of us on board, and at the moment, and a nurse practitioner. Yeah, so we're on the phone and we're pretty busy.
So you were among the doctors surveyed about the health of our health system. 93% of the people surveyed said there was a workforce crisis. Are you one of the ones that said there's a crisis?
Yes, yeah. It's shocking. It's terrible. It's just trying to get staff, trying to get nurses to stay. We're really lucky. We've got some amazing nurses, and trying to encourage nurses to become to general practice because they don't get paid as much as they do in the hospital. And, a lot of people's cost of living and mortgages, how do they have to take a sacrifice, a pay cut to work in primary care, which is, grassroots, sort of cold-faced and all that. So, yeah, it's awful. And the problem is, of course, that, we're all getting older. A lot of the workforce is, in their 50s, like myself. And, 10 years' time, I don't want to be working this hard. And I don't see a whole lot of young people coming up behind me, who want to buy my practice or work as hard as I do. So, yeah, it's not good.
You use the word crisis, but the Health Minister refuses to use that word. Does that matter to you?
I don't actually think he knows what we do, to be fair. I think if he actually came out to general practice and spent some time, he might sort of learn something. But the way he talks, it just makes you think he doesn't really understand what general practice is. I mean, I think he mentioned somebody who had metastatic melanoma of their shoulder, and they could have seen a physio to get that diagnosed. I mean, I think he's not really understanding what's happening at ground roots.
So it does matter to you that he doesn't recognise it as a crisis?
Yes, it does. Yes, it makes you feel undervalued, not listened to. You're working really, really hard, and then there's your health minister saying, well, there's no crisis, you're all fine. And when I talk to other health professionals, we just laugh because, well, it's ridiculous. There's a sign up at White Cross, which is our local A&E. There's a 6-hour wait to be seen. And, if you've got a sick baby, what do? I had a patient the other day who had a febrile child who was having rigors and shaking and rang the ambulance. They couldn't come. So he's dreaming if he thinks it's not a crisis. Yes, it's a crisis. It's ridiculous that he thinks it's not.
You sound a bit, ticked off and frustrated. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that would be a fair assessment.
So what keeps you awake at night?
Worrying that the phone calls I've made to people that maybe they are sicker than they've come across, and that maybe they need to call the ambulance and there's, no one can come, that the referrals I've made aren't going to be seen, and those people may have cancer and they're not picked up. I worry about just the health of my patients and whether what's being missed because of all this.
My name's Anthea Prentice and I'm a GP. I work in a small rural community of Cheviot, which is a solo rural general practice, and we're about a practice of about 1,300 patients.
So how would you describe the state of the healthcare system right now?
I think there's been a lack of planning and understanding of how the workforce is feeling and how the services are delivered, and that has come home to roost now that we've had the extra strain of COVID for a couple of years. And I think we're really feeling the pressure. I would almost say we're in crisis.
What's your biggest concern or fear for healthcare at the moment?
I think when you are able to get into the system, healthcare is still provided at an exceptional level, and doctors are working at the very best of their ability the whole time with the patient's best interest and in mind. But it's those practitioners themselves, I think. I am concerned that there's people leaving the workforce, cutting their hours, working in unsafe environments with low staffing rates, and the stress levels are becoming extreme, and people are suffering the ill effects of that to their mental health.
If you could say one thing to the people in power, your minister even, what is it?
I would like to say that general practice has been doing a lot of work through the pandemic, and before that we are usually the patient's first port of call. We're the entry point to the health system, and yet we are feeling undervalued, under stress and undermined. And it would be great to be able to make general practice more of a priority. And I think that, in turn, would take the stress off secondary care, because a lot of things, that if you don't get good screening, good healthcare at a primary level, then patients present with more complex problems further down the track. All those delays just lead to a poorer patient outcome.
So my name's Fee Bowles. I'm an emergency medicine specialist doctor in Whangarei. So I work in the ED there.
And how would you describe the state of the healthcare system where you work at the moment?
Busy. Busy is how I would describe it. Patients having very long waits to be seen. It's not optimal.
Do you consider that there is a workforce crisis in healthcare across the board?
Yes, I do. I think it's worse in some areas than others, but there is absolutely a crisis going on, yes.
What do you think when the health minister refuses to use that word or see it that way?
It just feels like we're not being listened to or heard, and that he's not really in touch with the people doing the job, really. I just think it's political. He just doesn't want to admit there's a problem.
It takes a lot, I think, for hundreds of doctors to put their names to something saying they think we're in real trouble in the health system. What do you what drove you to do this?
watching the effects it has on patients when there aren't enough staff. So in emergency departments, when we get blocked, when we can't get patients out into the hospital because all the beds are full, we know that mortality goes up and that more patients die when we become overcrowded and the quality of care goes down.
Doctor, does it scare you that patients may not be getting the best care that they deserve?
It does, and it hurts. It hurts when you can't give the care that you know people deserve and that you want to give them. It hurts you and it injures you inside.
The people who make the decisions, who allocate the money and decide what happens in our health system, what is the one thing you would like them to know?
That we are trying our absolute hardest, but we need more resources and we need to become competitive with Australia. We are losing nurses by the week to Australia because the pay is better over there and also because they have a more accepting immigration system.
If you could get one thing, what would it be?
Pay parity for nurses so that we can get some more nurses into the country who will come and work in general practice. That's what I would like.
So I would like to see the general practice primary care be seen as the foundation of our health system.
3 doctors there working on the front lines. Now, we've just had a text in from a listener regarding the weather in Christchurch. This person says they've just driven past the Heathcote River in Christchurch and there are lots of side roads that are coned off and flooding is happening. So take care if you are driving in that area. Keep us up to date. Text us on 2101. It is 5:20. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And coming up on the program, heaps of situations vacant, but the interview room is empty. Where are all the workers? Do get in touch about anything you've heard on the program this evening, especially if you're on Weather Watch where you are. Text us on 2101. Let us know what's happening. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to get to the headlines now. Ko ana anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. A survey of 900 doctors has found the vast majority say there is a healthcare workforce crisis, despite Health Minister Andrew Little continuing to deny there is a crisis in the sector. An Auckland GP has told Checkpoint that Andrew Little is dreaming if he thinks it's not a crisis. Wild weather has hit the country today, causing slips, downing trees and closing some roads. Steady rain has been falling across the Canterbury Plains, with snow in the high country, forcing the closure of a number of roads and causing surface flooding in Christchurch. And people who live at Selwyn Huts in Canterbury have been asked to evacuate voluntarily because of the swollen Selwyn River. The chair of the Christchurch Stadium Delivery Board says he's confident ratepayers won't be asked to contribute more to the project after multiple budget increases. The Takaha Stadium Board chair today announced a fixed price of $683 million for the multi-use arena has been agreed with the lead contractor. China's security pact with the Solomon Islands has become a key issue at the Pacific Islands Forum in Suva. Jacinda Ardern says China is changing the way it engages, while the US is stepping back up after its engagement had waned. And the number of patients being admitted to hospital through COVID-19 has been increasing in the past few days, with 710 in hospital today. And the country's second case of monkeypox has also been reported. Looking at the traffic around the country due to flooding, State Highway 15 in Northland is closed in both directions between Pakotai and Parakau. Delay your journey or consider using State Highway 14 and State Highway 1 as an alternative route. And the large slip on State Highway 1 between Orewa and Warkworth, which closed the road earlier, has largely been cleared, but the section of road Waka Kotahi says is unlikely to open until later. Expect delays on State Highway 1 on the Harbour Bridge still because of the high winds there. Stick to around 50 kilometres per hour. Remataka Hill is now open with caution. Please drive carefully and be prepared for delays as the queues clear. In the South Island, State Highway 77, Darfield to Rakaya Gorge Bridge is closed, and there are multiple closures, and conditions are pretty bad around the whole country. And Waka Kotahi is saying please just take extra care on the roads and check before taking your journey. I'll be back at 5:40 with more headlines.
That's a whopper of a traffic wrap.
Sure
Thank you so much, Anna. Northland Council is calling for a national crackdown on the sale of vapes, which it says is an epidemic infiltrating the community and causing problems at schools. In downtown Dargaville, there are 13 vape retailers in the space of a kilometre. Kaipara District Council says it can't do anything on its own and wants to see national guidelines to control their sale. Ane te kai ripoata, a Katie Todd.
You don't have to walk far in Dargaville for a vape. Take a stroll along the main drag and you'll find plenty on offer.
We've got different devices here, like that's just a little pod system, and our disposables that are just nicotine, tobacco flavours, premium tobacco.
That's one of 3 specialist vape retailers within 150 metres of each other, all brightly lit and sign written. In the space of a kilometre, you'll find another 10 stores selling vapes, inside dairies, petrol stations and $2 stores. All this in a town of fewer than 5,000 people.
I didn't even realise we had that much shops here for vaping, to be honest, since you just said. I think we only just need one.
Because the young ones are just smoking more and more vape, and it's actually bad for them. It's just become a normal for them.
Some residents did notice the increasing prevalence of vape sellers last year. They voiced concerns to 3 local health organisations and petitioned Kaipara District Council for an intervention. But what exactly is the problem with having vapes readily available? Jonette Bartlett, who owns vape store Biarchware, says many customers just want something to use in the short term so they can wean off cigarettes.
And a lot of our customers have done that. You start off on a high strength nicotine and then work all the way down, say like 18 megs nicotine, down to 11, 8, 6, 3, 1.5 and then 0. So there's no addiction there. They're slowly doing that transition, and then next minute they're not vaping. Yeah, we're losing customers, but it's not about money, it's about helping the people out in the long run.
But some studies show the reverse can happen, and vaping can be a gateway to smoking. Australian National University researchers have found non-smokers who vape are 3 times more likely to take up regular smokes than non-vapers. Studies of young vapers in New Zealand have found they're consuming the equivalent nicotine to a pack and a half of cigarettes a day, along with harmful bacteria and chemicals. It's these studies and these young people that are a key concern in Dargaville, according to Northland's smoke-free coordinator Bridget Rouse.
We see lots and lots of youth vaping. It's unusual because the people that you do see vaping, you actually think, did you smoke? I can't remember you smoking. Within our schools, there was all sorts of schools complaining throughout Northland as well as within Dargaville. They're always messaging and saying, can you come and present to our schools? We've got kids who are vaping. We're standing kids down for vaping. How do we deal with it?
So back to that petition, which collected 138 signatures before hitting a roadblock. Kaipara District Council can't simply say no more vape stores. It says that's beyond its, quote, existing policy frameworks. But instead it's escalated the issue. It's created a remit, which Local Government New Zealand's members will vote on this month, asking if they think vape stores should all be R18 and if there should be proximity limits to prevent clusters of vape retailers. If enough other councils agree, Local Government New Zealand will ask the government to tweak its legislation. Kaipara District Mayor Jason Smith is keen for change.
Kaipara District Council is concerned about vaping, and it is very concerned about the absence of national laws and guidelines to help us control this, which we see as an epidemic.
Bridget Rouse says the ideal outcome is no more vape stores in Dargaville and no more sales at dairies, general stores and petrol stations. She says it's imperative to move quickly.
New Zealand currently has almost 800 vape retailers. When we did this petition and this remit, we only had 713.
Local Government New Zealand will put the remit to its members on July 28th.
Plenty of situations vacant, but the prospects of filling them pretty dire. In a nutshell, that's the findings of a staffing survey of more than 330 businesses by the Employers and Manufacturers Association. 100% of those who responded had vacancies and 40% had been trying to fill the positions for more than 6 months. To talk about the results in more detail, Brett O'Reilly from the EMA joins us now. Kia ora, Brett.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Let's go straight to the elephant in the room, eh? Lots of people listening will say, well, you're not paying enough, you're not making it attractive enough for people to want those jobs.
Oh, look, these jobs are across the board. They're at various skill levels. We're seeing employers willing to pay well above minimum wage, well above living wage for these roles. But we just cannot find people. There are just not people in the market in New Zealand today for those roles, and there are plenty of anecdotal comments from employers saying that unless you're willing to offer well above that living wage, people just won't come and work. So they understand the situation.
So what, they're nudging up around the $25 an hour, are they, if they're going beyond the living wage?
Well above $25 an hour.
So what kind of money are they paying, Brett?
Well, it'll depend obviously on the occupation, but some of the anecdotal comments from employers in there is if you're not willing to pay above $25, people who are on benefits today won't work. They don't see, and that's obviously because the cost of living is exacerbating that. Transport's expensive, petrol's expensive, so even getting to work is expensive these days. So it's a crisis all the way around, and currently there's no plan to get out of it.
Okay, so can you just give us a brief overview? What sort of industries were you talking about, and what kind of jobs?
Okay, so this was across the board in terms of we had respondents from manufacturing, transport, construction, health and retail. So we had responses from 50 different sectors and industries. Most businesses had 20 to 99 employees, so about 42% of them. 37% had over 100 employees, and about 22% had less than 20 employees. So a really good cross-section of the economy, 335 survey responses, and not just responding to questions, but also lots of good anecdotal information in the survey, and comments from employers about how hard it is out there.
So, do they want 1 or 2 workers, or are we talking way more than that?
Oh, we're talking way more than that.
Hundreds in some cases.
Maybe not in individual businesses, but across some of those industries, yes, we're looking for hundreds of workers. I'll give you an example. It's not a New Zealand example, but I was at the Australian New Zealand Leadership Forum last week. They estimate at the moment that 1 in 5 trucks are off the road in Australia because they don't have truck drivers. We've had employers talk in this survey that they've had to cancel major contracts because they just can't find staff to service them. So this is not like anything we've seen, certainly in my lifetime. I've never seen a situation as grave as this, where businesses are turning away business because they simply can't find people.
Brett, I noticed in the detail of the survey, I think it was from memory, about 90% of the businesses surveyed had relied on migrant labour, right? Or
Correct.
Used migrant labour. So, are they too heavily reliant on migrant labour then?
Well, we haven't had a choice. We haven't had a choice in New Zealand because we haven't had a vocational education system that, or a compulsory education system that has created a skills pipeline to give people an alternative to migrants. People just don't employ migrants because they're willing to take lower wages. They employ migrants because they've got skills, and we just don't have those skills available in New Zealand. And so that has been the system that New Zealand has operated for a long, long time. Some of that's been helped by apprentices, but at that skilled end of the market, you just can't find people, and healthcare is a good example of that. So to turn the tap off and go cold turkey, which effectively is what we've done over the last 2 years, has created the situation. And despite some of the short-term changes in immigration, they're just not going to make a big enough difference fast enough.
OK, Brett, I'm giving you 30 seconds to tell me what the solution is.
Well, I think the solution is we need to treat this like the crisis that COVID was in 2020 and pull together a task force to really look at this. Not to examine the situation, but to come up with hard actions. Being small should be our superpower as a country, but we're not doing that. We have people in the Pacific Islands who could come here tomorrow and help out on short-term visas and help out in some of these sectors. Their economies have been decimated by COVID. They're reliant on us for remittances. So why not at least look to our backyard, to the countries that we're working with? Why isn't that on the agenda of the Pacific Forum this week, around how we can help them and how they can help us in this current situation? You know, this requires dramatic action, not just a change in policy settings.
Appreciate your time, Brett. That's Brett O'Reilly from the EMA. Let us know your thoughts on that one. Should we be bringing in more workers from the Pacific Islands, as he suggests? It is 26 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time to get to the business news now. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Anand Zaki, who's in our Christchurch newsroom, out of the rain. Kia ora, Anand. Spark has sold its stake in its mobile phone towers. So who's bought into that?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, nice and dry in here. Well, the telco giant, they've sold a 70% stake in its cell tower network to a Canadian investment fund, more specifically the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan Board, for $900 million. So the fund is going to take a majority stake in the standalone company, which is known as TowerCo, which owns Spark's nearly 1,300 cell towers, masts, rooftop installations, all the stuff used for their mobile and data services. Now, they're actually following a trend here. Cell phone towers have been sold in Australia, Asia, and Europe over the past couple of years. Basically, telecommunications companies are trying to free up money to pay for the expensive but crucially money-earning new technology like 5G that we hear about all the time now. Now, Spark will keep a 30% stake in TowerCo, and they'll have a 15-year right to use the towers, and they have a right to renew as well. Spark is saying that their shareholders can also expect some direct return from the sale. More on that due next month. Now, the deal still needs to be signed off by the Overseas Investment Office, and that's expected to be done next year. And speaking of towers, I told you it's a trend. Vodafone is in the final stages of selling its local network of nearly 1,500 towers. You can expect a similar sort of price tag and investment fund buy there as well.
And Anand, wow, troubled times in Sri Lanka, but Fonterra is going to carry on its operations there?
Yeah, Fonterra's been collecting milk from Sri Lankan dairy farmers since 1997. It's actually been a very good business for them over the years. Not massive, but still good nonetheless. But recently, of course, we've been hearing about the economic turmoil in Sri Lanka. The country's declared bankruptcy. There's no fuel. It has hyperinflation. The value of the rupee has plummeted as well. And that's meant Fonterra has taken an $81 million hit from its Sri Lankan operations. And we heard from them this morning. They're saying that they're continuing operations, but in a limited capacity. They're doing their best to make food nutrition available to people. And they say, they've built a good business in the country over the decades. Their brands are still well recognised. They actually have the number 1 and number 2 dairy brands in the country. But obviously challenging times. The chief executive of its Asia Pacific region, Judith Swales, told us that she believed the country will emerge out of the challenges. But in the meantime, they say they'll just look after its people and keep the business running.
OK, let's take a spin around the markets.
The top 50 index closed down 3 points at 11,103. The New Zealand dollar is at 61.1 US cents, a very strong US dollar at the moment, and it's at 90.8 Australian cents.
Thanks, Anand. Ka kite, Anand Zaki there with Business News. The US Vice President Kamala Harris will speak to Pacific leaders at the forum in Fiji tomorrow as part of its wider strategy to step up its engagement in the Pacific to counter China's influence. Our political reporter, Annika Smith, is at the forum in Suva and she joins us now. Annika, was the United States expected to feature at this year's forum?
Hi, Lisa. Well, yes and no. The US President Joe Biden was tipped to address the forum some months ago, but it's not until today that we got confirmation the US will be making an appearance here and that it would be US Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, tomorrow is a significant day. We believe it's the first time a US Vice President has been part of the forum's formal program as opposed to being as a dialogue partner addressing PIF leaders after the formal program ends. And this all comes in the context of Washington really re-strategizing here in the Pacific. It was only a few months ago that the White House's Indo-Pacific coordinator, Kirk Campbell, said he expected more high-level US officials to visit the Pacific and that the US needed more diplomatic facilities here to specifically counter China's growing presence. Now, we asked Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern what she thought of Kamala Harris's appearance tomorrow this afternoon, and she explicitly said that the US presence in the Pacific had waned over recent years, but put the speech tomorrow down to the US answering a direct call from the Pacific, Read Pacific led, to have direct engagement on this, specifically because the South Pacific Tuna Treaty is up for renegotiation.
So you were actually led into the forum this morning, so what did you hear?
Yeah, we got an inside look before the forum was closed off to the public, and we heard from the forum's Secretary General Henry Puna, and he made some opening remarks, and in those remarks he said it would be remiss of him not to acknowledge the Pacific leaders, his brothers and sisters, he said, who weren't here in Fiji for this 51st PIF. He said there had been a breakdown in connection over the years and that he hoped through existing dialogue mechanisms Micronesian countries could find value in the forum. So in that room today there was a real excitement that these Pacific leaders, after 3 years of being separated in the pandemic, could finally get back together for face-to-face talks, but also a sense of loss and grief at the fact that some of those chairs were empty.
And so what's Te Piramia Jacinda Ardern been up to?
So today we went for a drive, a 20-minute drive from where we're shooting from tonight, to a town called Nasinu. Now, in this town we toured a seed bank facility that's been conserving the region's seeds for important crops like taro, sweet potato, coconuts, bananas since the late 1990s. Now, the New Zealand government has just announced $10 million worth of funding for this seed plant, and that comes out of our $1.3 billion climate fund. It might seem like small fry out of that massive fund, but it's a 70% boost to that seed bank, so significant stuff for them, and that money will go towards new climate resilient crop varieties, research in that space.
And what's on the agenda for tomorrow?
So the program just gets busier and busier here. We obviously have Kamala Harris speaking to PIF leaders, and Jacinda Ardern has bilateral meetings with both Fiji and Solomon's prime ministers, and this all ahead of Thursday, the big day, where all of the PIF leaders will get together and have their big talks.
Thanks, Annika. Annika Smith joining us from a stunning-looking Suva this evening. It is 20 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Interested in your thoughts. Dargaville, 13 vape stores within 1 kilometre in such a small town. What do you reckon? Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines. Ane, Anna Thomas, mena pita pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. An Auckland GP says Health Minister Andrew Little doesn't understand what general practice is, and he's dreaming if he thinks there isn't a healthcare workforce crisis. A survey of 900 doctors has found the vast majority believe there is a crisis, despite Mr Little continuing to deny there is one. Auckland Council has been called out to 116 requests for service after heavy rain lashed the country today, causing slips, downed trees and road closures around the country. Heavy rain, snow and gale force winds are keeping key routes closed into the evening across Te Waipounamu, and Canterbury is being drenched by heavy rain with flooding, closing a number of roads across the region and in Christchurch City. Families on tight budgets could come under even more pressure if the official cash rate rises again tomorrow. The Reserve Bank is widely expected to raise the OCR by 0.5% to 2.5%. Vanuatu's government says climate change is a human rights issue and the Pacific needs to be united in order to hold the countries that are most responsible for causing the crisis to account. Leaders meeting at the Pacific Islands Forum in Fiji are expected to declare a climate emergency. And the first full colour picture from the new James Webb Space Telescope has been released in the US. Scientists say it's the deepest, most detailed infrared view of the universe to date, containing the light from galaxies that has taken many billions of years to reach us. And looking at the traffic, well, there are highways and local roads closed in Canterbury, parts of Northland, the West Coast, Otago, Marlborough, including the Crown Range, Lindis, Burks and Porters passes. And traffic is still being urged to keep speeds to 50 kilometres per hour on the Harbour Bridge because of high winds, so it's slow going there. Check in with Waka Kotahi's journey planner for details of road closures before you head away. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6 o'clock with the full news bulletin and sports and more weather.
Ngā mihi, Anna. Families on tight budgets could come under even more pressure if the official cash rate rises again tomorrow. The Reserve Bank is widely expected to raise the OCR by 0.5% to 2.5%, making it the sixth rise in a row. Any raise will be factored into banks' interest rates at a time when close to half of existing home loans are due to refix in the next 12 months. Amy Williams reports.
Mortgage advisor Bruce Patton expects to see home loan interest rates rise, putting more pressure on households.
People's general affordability as their mortgage continues to go up, coupled with the cost of living, which is just out of control. You know, every time I get a bill, it seems to be 5, 10, 20, 30% higher than it was 5 months ago. That's really the thing that's biting people.
He says people are spending less and reviewing their fixed costs to see where their budget can be trimmed. Some are breaking mortgages now to lock in a rate they know they can afford.
We're talking to people every single day that are ringing and worried about, hey, what should I break now or should I wait? You know, my rate's not due till May next year. Should I break it now and go on to a rate so I can know what I'm paying? So there's a lot of that investigative work going on, trying to understand where this might head.
Close to half of existing home loans are due for repricing in the next 12 months. KPMG's head of banking, John Kensington, says these borrowers could find the higher rates a struggle given rising fuel and food costs.
They might be on a fixed rate now that is coming off in a period of time and they're looking to renegotiate it. And I think they possibly would struggle if they've had some tightness come into their family budget.
Among them will be those who bought their first home in the past 2 years, whose interest rates will double. The Reserve Bank is hiking the OCR in a bid to put a lid on inflation, which hit 7% in the March quarter. There'll be an update next week. Council of Trade Unions economist Craig Rennie says wages have not kept up with the spiralling cost of living.
The wage spiral seems to be still a little bit missing in action. The last labour cost index series, more than a third of New Zealand workers didn't get a pay rise last year. So for many of them, for many people, they're not benefiting from the growth that we're seeing, you know, in the economy we're seeing in inflation. They're not seeing that change fully working its way through.
He says there are more people across different sectors struggling to make ends meet because of this. The Reserve Bank has indicated it might have to hike the OCR to 4%, but how far will it actually go? Here's Kiwi Bank Chief Economist Jared Kerr.
We think they're getting plenty of traction with their rate rises already and will continue to get traction. So we're hoping that they stop at around 3.5% and don't have to continue to 4%.
Forecasts aside, Bruce Patton says borrowers are in for a bumpy ride.
Look, it's anybody's guess as to how high it could go. We're hoping that we should theoretically be near the peak for the fixed rates, at least the longer fixed rate terms, but we're still going to see further movement in the short term and the floating rates for a little bit of time to come yet.
Economists expect the food price index, which measures changes in the prices households pay for food and is out tomorrow, to give a steer as to how inflation is tracking.
Let's get to some of your feedback now on the subject of health and whether there's a crisis or no crisis. This listener says, I'm standing here in tears. I just turned on the radio and heard the doctors talk about their stress. I am the mother of a GP who works so hard to try and manage the huge workload and support her young children. She's constantly under pressure, anxious and stressed. I'm frightened she's not going to survive this. I try and help as much as I can, but I'm going under too. Aaron's got in touch to say calling it a crisis is not going to magically undo this lack of capability reduced up over generations. And someone else says, how is it the government's fault for a pandemic? I think the point of the workers is they want some recognition. They're not expecting that calling it a crisis will solve it, but they want that recognition. And they also say it's not caused by the pandemic, but just exposed by the pandemic. A nurse has got in touch to say they work at a major hospital and it is in crisis, all capital letters. I'd be very interested to know who is telling Andrew Little we're pushed but okay, because we are not. A retired emergency specialist has got in touch to say, I would suggest that there is no healthcare crisis. The standard of care is world class. Instead, I believe there is a healthcare funding crisis. Any party in power who introduces adequate taxation for healthcare needs would face a voter revolt that would be encouraged by opposition parties. The solution must be a healthcare tax agreement by all political parties that solves the funding crisis. And this one, before we move on, I work in a small practice in Christchurch. Our doctors are working long hours, 7 days a week. Demand for appointments is huge, and we have phone calls and people calling in every day wanting to enrol, and we just have to turn them away. It is 11 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. A husband and wife diagnosed with lung cancer within months of each other are crowdfunding extra treatments to stay alive as long as they can for their young sons. Doctors can't explain how Graham and Mary Brooke Smith both have the disease. The non-smokers who live healthy lives have been given less than a year to live without treatment. The couple is having funded treatment like chemotherapy, but want to raise money for other options like immunotherapy that could give them more time with their young sons, who are 9 and 11.
Oh, when I first heard my diagnosis, that was bad enough. And so I was quite stoic about it, actually, at the time. At least my initial response was that at least the kids have their mother. And then we can set things up and arrange things so that they can live happy lives without me. But then when Mary's diagnosed, that all came crashing down very quickly, of course. And the odds were just out of this world, having lightning strike twice at the same time. And it was just tragic. I wasn't stoic then. I cried my eyes out, to be honest. And so did Mary. We just didn't know what to do. And it's just been amazing how much the community has really come forward and just helped us out with meals and working bees and stuff like that. It's just been absolutely wonderful with our church and the primary school that kids go to. They've all been so helpful. It's been amazing. So we've been very grateful for that.
Graham, it must be utterly devastating to know your sons will be without both parents.
Yeah, that was our main concern. It wasn't so much about ourselves when we got diagnosed. It's about what's going to happen to the children, because if the worst comes to worst, they look like they will be orphaned. And so Mary, my wife, she has a lovely friend, and they've known each other for 20 years. And she's Kirsty Steele and her husband Glenn. They have 2 young children themselves, have offered to adopt the boys if that should come to that. So it's been a huge, huge relief and such a blessing to us to know that they won't simply go to the state and that'll be their lives in foster care. So that's been a huge miracle for us, and so we're very grateful for them, for that.
But they are the reason, Graham, aren't they, that you want to fight this with all that you have, both you and your wife, to have as long as you can with your boys. So in order to do that, you need some help. What is the situation? You are looking at other treatments and they're very costly?
Yeah, well, when I was first diagnosed, they said without treatment, you've got about 6 months to live. With treatment, you've got 4+ years. So I was obviously banking on the plus side of that. But the treatment that was offered was not funded by Pharmac. So I really needed to have the funds for that. But then when Mary's diagnosed, it was a similar cost. We're looking at over $100,000 each. My treatment costs $11,000 a month, and it's 1 pill every day. and they'll last for a year. And my wife's treatments will be similar, where she'll get chemotherapy, but alongside that, she'll get immunotherapy. And her diagnosis was she'll have 6 months without treatment, 2 years with chemo, and if they have immunotherapy with that chemo, then it'll be 4+ years like mine. So we're there to fight for as long as time as we can, and hopefully even go into remission, given enough time, and obviously the treatments that we're going to be receiving, and that takes money because it's not funded by Pharmac. And we're going to do this for the kids, obviously, so they have parents and aren't orphaned.
How much money do you think it will take, Graham? What are you looking to raise?
Well, we're looking to raise about $210,000 for the both of us. That's only for the first 12 months of our treatment. My treatment will continue on, but because of the nature it is, because it's a pill, not chemo, the people who supply or manufacture the pill will continue to fund the pill themselves. And
after you pay for the initial year, Graham, is that
correct.
right?
That's correct. The initial $100,000 to $110,000 to be exact, and they'll continue paying that themselves. Now, for Mary's treatment, the first $8,000 of her $10,000 treatment every 3 weeks is for the immunotherapy. There's a $2,200 fee for administration. Now, that admin part will continue. That'll be ongoing every 3 weeks, $2,200 after the first 6 months. So her initial treatment will cost him $90,000 plus the $2,200 from then on. Yeah.
But it is of priceless value for you if you can be with your boys. I mean, the age they are now, can you tell us? Because an extra 4 years makes a lot of difference at that time in their lives.
Yes, they're 9 and 11, so they're primary school. And we obviously want them the longest time possible, so they'll become men and be more self-sufficient and support themselves. So we're hoping we'll be able to be there for them for those moments for as long as we can, and support them as parents do.
And that's Graham Brooke-Smith, who is crowdfunding for treatment after both he and his wife were diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. The bill is in for Christchurch's stadium and it comes with a promise it won't go up. The project has already faced a $150 million budget blowout, but the City Council says lead contractors have agreed to a fixed price of $683 million. Most residents, given the chance to have their say, were in favour regardless of the cost. Tessa Guest and visual journalist Nate McKinnon were at Council to hear the details.
In a world of ever-increasing price hikes, Chair of Te Kaha Project Delivery Barry Bragg is confident that won't happen with Christchurch's multi-use arena.
Overall, the board are confident about delivering the project within the total project budget. We think we have a very good contract going forward given the market conditions. We have made our recommendation to Council. We will be heard on Thursday the 14th of July.
A significant amount of money has been set aside as a contingency. Despite the project being partially publicly funded, today there was no detail on how much that might be.
We don't want to use the contingency, but we've had expert advice to say and the Council have required this, what is the total project budget so that we can make allowance for that and we don't have to ask ratepayers for any further money.
The case to push ahead despite the astronomical costs is strong. 77% of submissions during consultation were in support of an increased budget. 15% wanted to scrap the stadium and 8% wanted to pause and re-evaluate. Council research analyst Amy Martin says there was a key message from locals fed up with a decade of delayed earthquake rebuilds.
We deserve this facility. We've waited a long time for it. We've been through a lot over the last 10 years, and as a city and a region more generally, it's something that we feel we deserve.
And Venue's Ōtautahi Chief Executive Caroline Harvey-Tier is confident bookings for the stadium will be high.
This is going to be an exceptional venue and one that is exceptionally competitive on the national and Australasian markets particularly. It's going to be unique in design, it's going to be innovative in design, but it's also going to be uniquely local, and we think that is a really, really cool proposition in terms of attracting events to the city.
Barry Braggs says the real strain will kick in when building begins, but he stressed that lead contractor B6 Watpac would have sole responsibility of keeping it on track.
We are all motivated to keep to that time frame, B6 Watpac in particular, because they're not able to claim additional cost if that time moves out from that program date. So both parties will be working very closely to deliver on that program date.
Councillors are due to decide on the stadium's future on Thursday.
And let's get to more of your feedback, a lot of it coming in on the issue of the health workforce and whether it's a crisis or not. Kevin says it would be irresponsible of the Minister to use the word crisis. It's irresponsible for doctors to use it. I, as a patient, will avoid seeking treatment for fear of sitting for hours unseen or of adding to the pressure. That is a dangerous dynamic, he says. This in from a 65-year-old male nurse who says they've got a postgrad qualification in emergency nursing and have just returned from remote Australia where they were working in primary health in the Aboriginal community. After 12 years, no one wants me, this nurse says, in primary health, male and old. Another listener says putting funding into primary and community care is great value for money. We're a lot cheaper than hospitals. Making patients pay for care that they would get free if they went to an ED is short-sighted, to say the least. Yeah, a lot of you got strong opinions on this. And earlier we were talking to the EMA about lots of job vacancies and no one to fill them. This person says, come on, employers, address the white elephant in the room, the blatant ageism against the over 50s who want to work but don't want peanuts from the organ grinder.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. Auckland Council has been called out to 116 emergency calls for help after heavy rain. Wild weather has hit the country today, causing slips, downing trees and closing some roads. Melania Watson reports.
Most of the call-outs for help in Auckland related to flooded roads and blocked drains. Central and northern parts of the city were hardest hit. At least 10 trees had been downed by wind by 7 o'clock this morning, and one South Auckland business reported sewage flowing onto their forecourt. Meanwhile, 340 properties in Masterton have had power cut off for several hours. More than 80 homes in 3 areas in Taranaki have also been cut off, and 16 in Palmerston North. In Waikato, over 100 homes are affected currently.
And heavy rain, snow and gale force winds are keeping key routes closed across Te Waiponamu, the South Island. There are highways and local roads closed in Canterbury, the West Coast, Otago and Marlborough, including the Crown Range, Lindis, Burks and Porters Passes. Wakakotahi's Treska Forrester says motorists should be aware of the dangers of surface water, rising river levels, fallen trees and slips. She says some roads may remain closed overnight. Ms Forrester says contractors are making every effort to reopen the roads. And in Canterbury, people who live at Selwyn Huts have been asked to evacuate voluntarily because of the swollen river. James Thompson from Civil Defence says water doesn't appear to have seeped into any homes.
There could easily be places with water around properties, and we're not seeing any indicators or any reports of water actually inside houses or inside buildings. That's a good state to be in.
James Thompson says people should be careful driving because of the flooding. Doctors say the Health Minister's refusal to admit to the dire situation the sector's in has left them feeling unheard and undermined. Almost all of the 900 doctors surveyed by the Women in Medicine Charitable Trust agreed it was in crisis, but Health Minister Andrew Little refuses to use that word. Auckland General Practitioner Kushna Borthwick says it shows he's out of touch.
There's a sign up at White Cross, which is our local A&E. There's a 6-hour wait to be seen. And, if you've got a sick baby, what do? I had a patient the other day who had a febrile child who was having rigors and shaking and rang the ambulance. They couldn't come. So he's dreaming if he thinks it's not a crisis.
The survey found health professionals in more than 30 specialties are widely understaffed and under-resourced. Vanuatu's government says climate change is a human rights issue and the Pacific needs to be united in order to hold the countries that are most responsible for causing the crisis to account. The Pacific Islands Forum in Fiji is in its second day today. Leaders at the forum are set to endorse a Vanuatu initiative calling on the UN General Assembly to support a resolution requesting the International Court of Justice to provide an advisory opinion on the impacts of climate change. The leaders are also expected to declare a climate emergency following the recommendations of the Forum Foreign Ministers meeting last week. A mortgage advisor says people are concerned about the prospect of mortgage rates rising further. Bruce Patton from Loan Market says some borrowers are breaking loans now so as to lock in a rate they know they can afford. He says people are spending less and reviewing their fixed costs to see where their budget can be trimmed. The Reserve Bank is widely expected to raise the OCR by 0.5% to 2.5% tomorrow. Wellington's Sky Stadium says it needs more staff for its sold-out All Blacks Ireland rugby test match this weekend. Chief Executive Shane Harman says the third and deciding test on Saturday night is one of the most anticipated sporting events to be held at the stadium. It's also the first time the arena has sold out in 3 years. But Mr Harman says they're short of staff and they're appealing for members of the public to get in touch if they want work. He says, like many industries right now, staffing is tight.
Like the rest of the hospitality, we're experiencing staff shortages due to illnesses. Traditionally, pre-COVID, we'd have a good stream of international students and backpackers with hospitality experience working at the venue. And it's just a perfect storm at the moment.
Shane Harman says they need bartending and corporate box staff on Saturday. The police have named the woman who died after an assault in Auckland at the weekend. Emergency services were called early on Saturday after 62-year-old Cecilia Aotearoa was assaulted in Coburn Street in the suburb of Grey Lynn. She died a short time later. A man has been charged with murder. President Biden has introduced the first images to be shown publicly from the James Webb Telescope, the largest and most powerful ever launched into space and now in orbit around the sun. The telescope is able to peer through cosmic dust clouds to detect light from the earliest stars. The BBC's Jonathan Amos reports.
President Biden was impressed as he inspected the first image to come down from the James Webb Telescope. A cluster of galaxies cut through by arcing red smudges, the telltale signature of starlight from the very early universe. Webb's predecessor, the Hubble Observatory, would stare at a single spot on the sky for weeks on end to try to capture the light of objects that had taken more than 13 billion years to reach us. Webb has matched Hubble's efforts already, with only a few hours of observations.
To sport now, and the wet and windy conditions in Wellington tonight could play into Ireland's hands in their second match against the Māori All Blacks. The Māori won the first game and are hoping to seal a 2-0 series win over the world's number 2 ranked Test nation. DJ Perenara will captain the Māori All Blacks, while veteran centre Keith Earls will captain Ireland for the first time. The 34-year-old Earls, who's played 94 tests, is determined to give the squad a boost ahead of the weekend's Test series decider against the All Blacks.
It's already been a historic tour. Hopefully we can get another win on Tuesday night, which will give us momentum going into Saturday as well. And hopefully on Sunday we'll all be celebrating an incredible tour.
And the match kicks off at 7:05. Having not played a one-day international for more than a year, Mitchell Santner is raring to go for the Black Caps ahead of the second cricket one-dayer against Ireland in Dublin tonight. Santner arrived on the tour late after catching COVID and wasn't available for the Black Caps' narrow win in Game 1. Ish Sodhi's 2 wickets and Michael Bracewell's match-winning century will leave the selectors with a dilemma on which spinners to include. And the former Manchester United forward Nani has joined A-League football club Melbourne Victory on a 2-year contract. The 35-year-old spent 8 years in England with United, where he won 4 Premier League titles and the Champions League in 2008. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Dylan Mayhew talks us through the winners of this year's Field Prize. It's a kind of maths equivalent to those awards the folk get from the Nobel mob. Tony Stamp samples the latest rowdy pop from Hooray for the Riff Raff, while on this week's Sci-Fi Sci-Fact, Mike Price tells us what's plausible about a bloke the size of a small insect packing a punch like Mike Tyson. You know, like Ant-Man. On nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Te reo Ererangi o Aotearoa. Now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Severe weather warnings and watches for wind, rain and snow about central and southern New Zealand. Ease tonight or early tomorrow. So looking at Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, fine spells and isolated showers. Waikato to Manawatu, including the Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Rain with heavy falls turning to showers and northeast gales easing. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain with heavy falls clearing this evening, winds gale at times. Aotearoa to Wellington and Wairarapa, also Marlborough and Nelson. Periods of rain with heavy falls clearing tomorrow morning, except Aotearoa to Porirua. East or northeast gales easing. Buller and Westland, areas of rain easing. Severe gale easterlies in exposed places, but they will ease this evening. Canterbury and Otago, heavy rain and snow down to 300 metres, easing overnight and tomorrow. Strong or gale easterlies tending southerly tomorrow. Southland and Fiordland, scattered rain, and for the Chatham Islands, rain and northeast gales developing tonight. Change to strong westerlies and showers tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 6:09. I'll have more headlines at 6:30 and another news bulletin at 7.
Thanks, Anna. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Britain's next Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party won't be decided until September the 5th. Boris Johnson's successor must first secure the backing of 20 of their party's MPs and then survive a series of votes to get to the final two. Party members will then select the winner. As the BBC's Chris Mason reports, contenders are now recording videos in the hope of influencing the votes.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
From Boris Johnson's resignation to the emerging cacophony of voices trying to replace him. Visions and videos, talks of their past and our future, promises and persuasion, and lots of it.
Is raising taxes during a cost of living crisis the right?
Mind you, this is all we saw of the former Chancellor today. Rishi Sunak published his launch video on Friday and currently has more publicly declared support from Tory MPs than anyone else. One of his biggest rivals is likely to be Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary.
Morning.
Who posted her launch video this morning.
To win the next election, we need to deliver, deliver and deliver for the British people.
Meanwhile, underground in the bunker of Churchill's war rooms in Westminster, two other wannabes seeking the spotlight. The current Chancellor made a big promise on tax.
As Prime Minister, I will cut the base rate of income tax to 19p in 2023, 18p in 2024. And that will give households back £900 a year on average.
One after another, candidates have been focusing on saying they'd cut taxes and criticising the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak for putting them up. He says he wants to cut them too, but only when it's responsible. Suella Braverman said tax cuts were needed immediately.
Don't vote for me because I'm a woman. Don't vote for me because I'm brown. Vote for me because I love this country and because I would do anything for it.
This is what trying to become Prime Minister looks like at this stage of the race. Events here, there and everywhere, yes, and those not seen as favourites at this stage making the loudest noises now while they can. The former Equalities Minister, Kemi Badenoch, has picked up the endorsement of Michael Gove. And while some have gone for a snazzy launch video, others have opted for the homemade approach.
I've decided to seek the nomination to be the leader of our party.
The former Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, is also standing, and he's worried about his party's future.
Sleaze, scandal, internal warfare. We've seen this movie before, and we know how it ends.
Our leadership has to change.
And the others to already declare so far, Penny Mordaunt and Tom Tugendhat.
The experience I offer is not from Whitehall, it's from the real world. It's from Afghanistan and Iraq.
The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps.
I can help you win your seat.
And the runner-up last time is running again this time, Jeremy Hunt.
You might be able to see something.
They all want to replace this man, who'll soon be looking for another job.
But you need 6 months training.
I do. Look,
Boris Johnson's successor will be announced by Monday the 5th of September. The business of whittling down the wannabes begins tomorrow.
Members of the US Congress January 6th committee are suggesting they will use tomorrow's hearing to draw direct links between the extremist groups that stormed the US Capitol and people in Donald Trump's orbit. CNN's Ryan Noble reports.
Right-wing extremist groups, many of whom allegedly came to Washington intent on disrupting Congress's certification of the 2020 election, will now be the focus of tomorrow's House Select Committee hearing.
Just to give a historical precedence to this group.
The committee is prepared to outline the role groups like the Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, and Three Percenters played on January 6th. They will grill a former Oath Keeper spokesperson, Jason Van Tottenhove.
All I'm doing is giving a historical precedence. That's all I'm able to talk on because that's the extent of my knowledge base.
This after prosecutors revealed new details of how the Oath Keepers allegedly prepared for violence. At least one member bringing explosives, including military ordnance grenades, to the D.C. area. But the committee believes these groups weren't operating in a vacuum and has been looking into whether their connections go all the way to the Trump White House.
We obviously want to probe any connection between these dangerous groups and the White House. I think we've gotten some answers, but there's still a great deal we don't know that we're endeavoring to find out.
Tuesday's hearing comes as Steve Bannon has a change of heart about cooperating with the committee.
All hell is going to break loose tomorrow. Just understand this. All hell is going to break loose tomorrow.
Bannon, staring down a criminal contempt trial, now tells the committee he's willing to talk, but only if he can do it in public on his own terms. Prosecutors have called this move a stunt to try and wiggle out of his criminal contempt charges. The Department of Justice also revealing that they've interviewed former Trump lawyer Justin Clark. Clark told DOJ Trump never told Bannon he would not waive executive privilege in order for him to speak to the committee. This despite a letter from Trump to Bannon this weekend saying he now waives privilege claims. The committee is willing to hear from Bannon, but on their ground rules.
We do depositions. This goes on for hour after hour after hour. We want to get all our questions answered, and you can't do that in a live format.
It is 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. At least 6 people were killed after Russia bombed the second biggest city in Ukraine, Kharkiv. 2 of the dead were a father and his 17-year-old son, their car taking a direct hit as they were on their way to pick up a university entrance certificate. CNN's Alex Marquardt joined a team of pharmacists in Kharkiv preparing to get life-saving medicine to the front line as they dodge rocket attacks in their own city.
In a boarded-up pharmacy in Kharkiv, we follow Yulia Klemnyuk down into the basement. They never used this space before the war. Now it holds shelf after shelf of vital, donated medicine, while also serving another purpose.
As we've been down here, we can hear some heavy shelling from up above. That's not very common at this time of the day in mid-morning. Thankfully, we're already down in the basement, so we're where we need to be.
That shelling killed at least 6 city residents. Yulia and her team are unfazed, preparing to head out on a monthly visit to multiple frontline villages which desperately need hard-to-get medicine, medical supplies, and basics like baby formula. The pharmacy comes to the village, she says. Pharmacies are either destroyed or there are no pharmacists, and people need medicine. The lead vehicle in the convoy is an ambulance. When it arrives in the first village, its sirens ring out to tell everyone they're here. Soon, a line has formed in the rain. Old retirees, young parents with their kids, anyone who's left here seems to come out, including a village doctor. We really need medication. We don't have a local pharmacy. We have nowhere to buy anything, she says. Insulin, heart, and blood pressure drugs are at the top of her list, along with sedatives and antidepressants. Animals are a priority too. Another car is full of dog food for beloved pets like Baikal, whose owner, Igor, says Baikal is shell-shocked from all the explosions. This village had been occupied by Russian forces and caught between the warring sides, the scars of the fighting very visible as is the Russian retreat. When the Russians occupied this village, a man who lives here says that they would tuck their tanks and their armored vehicles between houses and cover them up to try to hide them. But then the Ukrainians retook this village, and you can see they blew up and destroyed this armored vehicle. After about an hour, the team packs up and moves on to a poorer rural village just 25 kilometers or 16 miles from the closest Russian position. Here, the residents gather around even faster. The profound need for aid is clear. While we're there, a team from World Central Kitchen arrives to hand out meals. Another eager line forms. Many of the Ukrainians we met were forced to live in the basements of their own homes while Russians occupied them, Yulia tells us. They're helpless, held hostage by this situation, she says. We help because they cannot provide for themselves.
The new Australian government has issued a stark warning about the threat of conflict in the Indo-Pacific region in the coming years. The new Australian Defence Minister, Richard Marles, has used a major speech in Washington to say the world is undergoing a military build-up at a rate unseen since the Second World War. The ABC's Jade McMillan reports.
Well, Richard Marles emphasised the importance of the Australia-United States alliance, but he argued that neither country can afford to stand still, in his words, when it comes to the Indo-Pacific. Richard Marles said that China is engaging in the biggest military build-up since the end of the Second World War, and he said that the strategic environment in our region is only going to become more challenging in the years ahead. He said that the United States looks to Australia as a leader in the Indo-Pacific and that Australia is committed to doing its share. The Deputy Prime Minister didn't specifically reference Taiwan, but he did point to Russia's invasion of Ukraine to argue that the stakes here are incredibly high.
Notwithstanding our strong foundations, we can't afford to stand still because in the years ahead, the US-Australia alliance will not only have to operate in a much more challenging strategic environment in the Indo-Pacific, it will need to contribute to a more effective balance of military power aimed at avoiding a catastrophic failure of deterrence. Events in Europe underline the risk we face when one country's determined military build-up convinced its leader that the potential benefit of conflict was worth the risk.
Richard Marles began his trip to Washington by paying his respects at Arlington National Cemetery, and he has a series of high-level meetings lined up over the next few days, including with US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin. He's also expected to meet members of Congress, and at the top of the agenda in those discussions is likely to be the AUKUS arrangement, the deal between Australia, the US and the UK, under which Australia will obtain nuclear-powered submarines. So a packed agenda for Richard Marles in what is his first visit to the United States as Defence Minister and Deputy Prime Minister.
There are strict new rules to protect Australians from text message scams. From today, mobile phone providers could be fined up to $250,000 if they don't identify, trace and block text message scams, share information about scam messages with other providers and report scams to the authorities. The ABC's Annie Guest reports.
Dozens of school kids are on their phones at the bus stop, and scams are part of the deal.
I got one last week. I get them a lot.
I got this message a couple of weeks ago and it said that I won a free gift card or something.
Lots of fake, employing, they say they're from Target, but they're not.
And how old are you? 10. They were just if you call this number, you'll get $10 or something of free data.
Others haven't been so lucky. Regulators estimate Australians have lost $6.5 million through text scams in just 3 months. Nerina O'Loughlin is the chairwoman of the Australian Communications and Media Authority.
Clicked on links, they've been asked to provide personal information. They may have been asked to make a small payment so that the scammer can get hold of their bank account details and their personal details. And what we find is at the extreme, people have lost their identity completely to these scammers, which means they have access to all their personal information and can access their bank accounts and pretty much take, in some cases, their entire life savings.
Text scams are on the rise. At the same time, scam calls are drawing fewer complaints. Nerida O'Loughlin attributes that to rules introduced in 2020 requiring telecommunications companies to take action against scam calls.
Scammers are relentless and they are agile and they will move across different technologies to try and get to you.
Now, the Australian Telecommunications and Media Authority will apply similar rules to scams arriving either by call or text.
So today the ACMA has formally registered a new rules that require for telecommunications companies to identify, to trace and to block SMS scams and report those known scams to authorities. And we're hoping that these rules will help Australian consumers as they have been helped by a previous code we put in place to reduce scam calls. And that code has resulted in a reduction of estimated 500 million scam calls to Australian consumers over the last 16 months.
Telstra, Optus and other big Australian telcos are represented by the Communications Alliance. Its chief executive is John Stanton.
It's not an easy exercise to undertake. There's a lot of requirements around tracking and blocking and identifying and reporting. But I think the industry has done a good job to address this in collaboration with the regulators and with consumer representatives.
The telcos will face penalties of up to $250,000 for breaching the new code. The regulator hopes the rule complements other action put in place last month requiring multi-factor identification checks for transactions commonly targeted by scammers.
You may not know his name, but you will definitely know his music. 60 years after Monty Norman's theme tune for James Bond was first heard, it remains one of cinema's most recognisable pieces of music. Monty Norman has died at the age of 94, but the Bond theme still accompanies the famous spy when he appears on the big screen. As the BBC's Vincent Dowd reports, Monty Norman was originally a singer.
Monty Norman's writing career began in the brash world of 50s British musicals.
I never had it so good since the day I was born.
In his 20s, Monty Norman worked as a band singer. In 1961, he wrote a stage musical called Belle. One of the backers was film producer Cubby Broccoli, who, though the show flopped, introduced him to his producing partner, Harry Saltzman.
He said, the two of us are going to do Ian Fleming's James Bond novels as films, and we'd like you to do the score of the first one.
Dr. No and its successors were huge hits. Nothing else he wrote ever had the same success. But in the Bond theme, Monty Norman originated one of the classics of film music.
Humans can see deeper into space than ever before, with the first images of the world's most powerful telescope finally received. The James Webb Space Telescope has captured distant galaxies, offering a glimpse of the universe 13 billion years ago. NASA says the technology will help reveal the origins of our universe, solar system, and even life itself. The ABC's Stephanie Smale reports.
The James Webb Telescope is designed to reveal the furthest and oldest reaches of our universe. In the US President Joe Biden's words, it's shining a light through new windows in time.
Light from other worlds, orbiting stars, far beyond our own. Light where stars were born and from where they die. Light from the oldest galaxies, the oldest documented light in the history of the universe, from over 13 billion, let me say that again, 13 billion years ago.
The powerful $15 billion Deep Space Telescope was launched 6.5 months ago. NASA Chief Bill Nelson explains the significance of its first image, which, to an untrained eye, looks like a combination of bright red, white and yellow specks on a black background.
Light travels at 186,000 miles per second. And that light that you are seeing on one of those little specks has been traveling for over 13 billion years. And by the way, we're going back further because this is just the first image. We're going back almost to the beginning.
The telescope reached its lookout point in January, but it's taken months to adjust the equipment so it can do its job. Bill Nelson says the NASA technology, made possible by a combined effort with the European and Canadian space agencies, will move the boundaries of space exploration and science.
It is going to be so precise, you're going to see whether or not planets, because of the chemical composition that we can determine with this telescope of their atmosphere, if those planets are habitable. We are going to be able to answer questions that we don't even know what the questions are yet.
The image released today doesn't include planets, but the hunt for them will be a top priority. 4 more galactic images from the telescope are due to be released tomorrow.
Let's get to some of your final thoughts before we head off on vaping and the high density of vape shops in Dargaville. Stuart says vaping, never trust tobacco companies. Another listener says, come on, if it's a way to give up smoking, make them a pharmacy-only product. And another listener says nicotine vaping is highly addictive. It's a highly addictive drug, not a recreational device. It must be treated as a controlled substance. On the subject of job vacancies, this is the interview with Brett O'Reilly from the EMA, who says that perhaps we could bring in some more Pacific Island workers. A listener's got in touch to say, where will these low-paid PI workers live? Oh yeah, someone else's problem. Patrick says, Brett gilds the lily with the squeaky wheel. They don't train anyone in this country, but have been reliant on cheap immigrants. We have a housing shortage here. Why would we want to import more people? Jan says, companies want Pacific workers here as they work hard for a season or two, return to the islands for part of the year with sufficient funds to live. It's hardly a level playing field for workers permanently living here. On the Christchurch Stadium, someone says it's incorrect to say that Christchurch ratepayers are in favour of the stadium. Most of those who responded were in favour of the stadium, but they're not necessarily a representative cross-section of ratepayers. Good point. And another person says the Christchurch Council is naive fools if they think that a fixed price will actually be a fixed price for the stadium. That's about all we've got time for. If you missed anything from the show, you can check us out on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō. From 5 a.m. tomorrow, Wellington Sky Stadium is short-staffed thanks to COVID ahead of Saturday's sold-out All Blacks Ireland game. Its chief executive joins First Up's Nathan Rarere to discuss his last-minute recruitment drive. Maybe Nathan's interested.
Now it's time for the headlines. Thanks, Lisa. Heavy rain, snow and gale force winds are keeping key routes closed across Te Waipounamu, the South Island. Waka Kotahi says motorists should be aware of the dangers of surface water, rising river levels, fallen trees and slips. And Auckland Council has received 116 emergency call-outs after heavy rain. And Auckland General Practitioner says Health Minister Andrew Little's refusal to call the current healthcare situation a crisis shows he is out of touch. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
We're celebrating 50 years of Te Matatini, the foremost Māori performing arts festival and national kapahaka competition in the world. Join me, Julian Wilcox, and Rob Ruha, the music director of Te Matatini 50 album. We'll discuss and play some of the best and most famous Māori waiata over the past 50 years. Sunday, after the 1 p.m. news, here on RNZ National.